The invasion of Iceland, codenamed Operation Fork, was a British military operation conducted by the Royal Navy and Royal Marines during World War II to occupy and deny Iceland to Germany. At the start of the war, Britain imposed strict export controls on Icelandic goods, preventing profitable shipments to Germany. As part of its naval blockade, Britain offered assistance to Iceland, seeking cooperation as a belligerent and an ally, but Reykjavik declined and reaffirmed its neutrality. The German diplomatic presence in Iceland, along with the island's strategic importance, alarmed the British. After failing to persuade the Icelandic government to join the Allies, the British invaded on the morning of the 10th of May 1940. The initial force of 746 British Royal Marines commanded by Colonel Robert Sturgis disembarked at the capital Reykjavik. Meeting no resistance, the troops moved quickly to disable communication networks, secure strategic locations, and arrest German citizens. Requisitioning local transport, the troops moved to Havalfjörður, Kaldathans, Sandskeið, and Akranes to secure landing areas against the possibility of a German counterattack. On the evening of the 10th of May, the government of Iceland issued a protest, charging that its neutrality had been flagrantly violated and its independence infringed, noting that compensation would be expected for all damage done. The British promised compensation, favourable business agreements, non-interference in Icelandic affairs, and the withdrawal of all forces at the end of the war. Resigning themselves to the situation, the Icelandic authorities provided the invasion force with de facto cooperation, though formally maintaining a policy of neutrality. In the following days, air defense equipment was deployed in Reykjavik and a detachment of troops sent to Akureyri. However, the initial invasion force was ill-equipped, only partially trained and insufficient to the task of occupation and defense of the island. On the 17th of May, 4,000 additional troops of the British Army arrived to relieve the Marines. In July, elements of the 2nd Canadian Division and 3rd Canadian Division were landed. Commonwealth occupation forces eventually totaled 25,000 infantry with support elements from the Royal Air Force, Royal Navy and Royal Canadian Navy. 1 year after the invasion, forces from the still officially neutral United States were stationed on the island by agreement with the Icelandic government, relieving the bulk of British ground forces. U.S. forces grew considerably after the U.S. entered the war on the 7th of December 1941, reaching up to 30,000 Army, Navy and Air Force personnel at any one time. The RAF and RCAF continued to operate from 2 Royal Air Force stations through to the end of the war. Invasion. The invasion of Iceland was a British military operation conducted by the Royal Navy and Royal Marines during World War II to occupy and deny Iceland to Germany. At the start of the war, Britain imposed strict export controls on Icelandic goods, preventing profitable shipments to Germany. As part of its naval blockade, Britain offered assistance to Iceland, seeking cooperation as a belligerent and an ally, but Reykjavik declined and reaffirmed its neutrality. The German diplomatic presence in Iceland, along with the island's strategic importance, alarmed the British. After failing to persuade the Icelandic government to join the Allies, the British invaded on the morning of the 10th of May 1940. The initial force of 746 British Royal Marines commanded by Colonel Robert Sturgis disembarked at the capital Reykjavik. Meeting no resistance, the troops moved quickly to disable communication networks, secure strategic locations, and arrest German citizens. Requisitioning local transport, the troops moved to Havalfjörður, Kaldathans, Sandskeið, and Akranes to secure landing areas against the possibility of a German counterattack. Occupation. British occupation. Under Brigadier George Lamy, Alabaster Force was formed to permanently occupy Iceland and fortify the island's defence. On the 17th of May 1940, the British 147th Infantry Brigade arrived to relieve the Royal Marine Invasion Force, who left the 19th of May. Stretched thin, Brigadier Lamy requested additional forces, and 49th Infantry Division HQ, under Major General Harry O. Curtis, and the 146th Brigade arrived the 26th of May, followed by numerous convoys of troops and supplies. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, on his way home from visiting President Roosevelt, visited British occupation troops in 1940, and suggested the creation of a mountain and snow warfare school. Elements based in Akureyri formed the Tactical School Winter Warfare course, which trained the 49th into a mountain Arctic division. Additional reinforcements over the course of the summer included field artillery, air guns, Bren carriers, engineer and construction units, and support forces. The final British ground reinforcements, an infantry battalion and artillery battery, arrived in June 1941. By July 1941 there were over 25,000 British troops on the island. Construction of airfields, harbours, roads and other facilities began immediately. Hvalfjörður became a naval base for merchant escort and anti-submarine forces, with extensive facilities including a mine depot, pier and jetties, accommodation, a freshwater system, ammunition storage, a fleet bakery, bulk naval storage warehouse, recreation facilities, a direction-finding station and a fuel farm. The facility was protected by a minefield, anti-submarine gate and boom across the fjord, coastal guns, AA batteries, and anti-submarine trawlers. The Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm 701 Squadron provided initial air support, and the Army built two airfields, RAF Kaldadans and RAF Reykjavik, home to several RAF and RCAF squadrons until the end of the war. As naval base facilities grew, coastal command aircraft were stationed for patrol, reconnaissance, and anti-submarine duties. The battleships HMS Devonshire and King George V visited Akureyri Harbour in May 1941. Just prior to the sea battle with the German warships Bismarck and Prinz Eugen in the Straits of Denmark between Greenland and Iceland, the hospital ship Leinster, based at Akureyri Harbour, sailed on the 24th of May to care for the wounded after the destruction of HMS Hood in the battle. Two hospitals were also built. No. 50 General Hospital was built at Reykjavik and operated from June 1940 to March 1942. No. 30 General Hospital operated from July 1940 to September 1941. At the end of hostilities, most British facilities were turned over to the Icelandic government. 199 Commonwealth soldiers are buried in Iceland in 6 cemeteries cared for by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Canadian occupation. I need hardly point out the strategic importance, not only of the security of the North Atlantic sea lanes, but to the defense of this continent, of maintaining control of Iceland. Quote, on May 18, 1940, Britain requested Canada to garrison and defend Iceland with the 2nd Canadian Division, along with Air Force, anti-air, shore battery and coastal defense elements. Z Force, led by Brigadier L. F. Page, with part of his brigade headquarters and the Royal Regiment of Canada, embarked the Empress of Australia on June 10, and landed at Reykjavik on the 16th of June 1940. The remainder of the 2,659-man Z Force, comprising Les Fusiliers Montreuil, the Cameron Highlanders of Ottawa, a brigade signal section and details, arrived on the 9th of July. Canadian forces dispersed across the island and initiated work on defence positions and preparations for the building of the aerodrome in Caldathans, building roads, improving harbours, establishing guard over strategic assets, and setting up coast watch stations. On 9 February 1941, Canadian forces engaged a single German aircraft overflying the island, owing to pressing needs elsewhere, including Canadian commitments to the defence of Britain and to providing garrison troops in the West Indies. It was agreed to redeploy Canadian forces. Force headquarters and the Royal Regiment sailed for England on 31 October and rejoined the main body of the 2nd Canadian Division. The Camerons, who had been allotted to the 3rd Division, spent the winter on the island and departed for England on 28 April 1941. They were temporarily replaced by British garrison forces, until 7 July 1941, when the defensive Iceland was transferred from Britain to the United States, by agreement with Iceland. RCAF aircraft with No. 162 Squadron RCAF remained on station through the war and attacked 2 boats in 1944, sinking U-342 on 17 April 1944. United States occupation Britain needed her troops elsewhere, and requested that U.S. forces occupy the island. The U.S. agreed on 16 June 1941. The 1st Provisional Marine Brigade of 194 officers and 3,714 men from San Diego under the command of Brigadier General John Marston sailed from Charleston, South Carolina on the 22nd of June to assemble as Task Force 19 at Argentia, Newfoundland. TF-19 sailed on the 1st of July. On the 7th of July, Britain persuaded the Alding to approve an American occupation force, and TF-19 anchored off Reykjavik that evening. The United States Marine Corps commenced landing on the 8th of July, and disembarkation was completed on the 12th of July. On the 6th of August, the United States Navy established an air base at Reykjavik with the arrival of Patrol Squadron VP-73 PBY Catalinas and VP-74 PBM Mariners. United States Army personnel began arriving in Iceland in August. Outcome: Britain invaded to forestall a German occupation, to provide a base for naval and air patrols, and to protect merchant shipping lanes from North America to Europe. In this the invasion and occupation was successful. However, the presence of British, Canadian, and U.S. troops had a lasting impact on the country. Foreign troop numbers over the period of occupation were as follows. In some years this equaled 25% of the population, or almost 50% of the native male population. Icelanders were and remain sharply divided about the war and occupation, what is sometimes referred to as Blessaðstríðið or the Lovely War. Quote, some point to the subsequent economic revival, others to loss of sovereignty and social upheaval. The occupation required the building of a network of roads, hospitals, harbors, airfields and bridges across the country, and this did have enormous positive economic impact. However, social interaction between troops and local women was severely censured and caused considerable controversy and political turmoil. Women were often accused of prostitution and of being traitors. 255 children were born from these liaisons. The Icelandsborn. In 1941, the Icelandic Minister of the Judiciary investigated the situation, and the police tracked 500+ women who had been consorting with the soldiers. Many were upset that the foreign troops were taking away women, friends, and family. In 1942, 2 facilities opened to house these girls. Both closed within a year after investigations determined that most liaisons were consensual. About 332 Icelandic women married foreign soldiers. During the occupation, on the 17th of June 1944, Iceland declared itself a republic, and while continuing to cooperate with the British, Canadian, and American military, they remained officially neutral throughout the war. As the war drew to a close, the Reykjavik Agreement, signed in 1948 between the USA and the Republic of Iceland, stipulated that the American army would leave the country within 6 months, and Iceland would take possession of the Reykjavik airport. This did not happen for many decades, and a substantial U.S. military presence remained in Iceland until the 30th of September 2006. Although the British action was to forestall any risk of a German invasion, there is no evidence that the Germans had an invasion planned. There was, however, German interest in seizing Iceland. In a post-war interview with an American, Walter Warlamont claimed Hitler definitely was interested in occupying Iceland prior to occupation. In the first place, he wanted to prevent anyone else from coming there, and, in the second place, he also wanted to use Iceland as an air base for the protection of our submarines operating in that area. After the British invasion, the Germans drew up a report to examine the feasibility of seizing Iceland, Operation Icarus. The report found that while an invasion could be successful, maintaining supply lines would be too costly, and the benefits of holding Iceland would not outweigh the costs.